Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me today. I'm Matthew Acrick. I'm a Policy and Research Officer at the CIPP, and I'm here joining Sintra today to give you a little bit of a legislative update to prepare you for the 25-26 tax year. Before I start, please do pop any questions you have in the chat. Talk to each other, interact with each other while you're here. This is about sort of collaboration and getting ready for the new tax year. So any questions, put them in the chat. If I can, while we're going through, I'll try and answer those questions. If not, we've got some time at the end to try and go through a few. So I'll pick out some questions to try and sort of expand on what we cover in the session. And if there's anything that we can't get to, then I've been told that Sintra will be able to pull those questions and I'll be able to get back to you on some of those after the session. So don't be afraid to put stuff in the chat. We'll either get to it while we're going through or we'll come to it after. So as you can see here, this is the policy and research team. So it might not always be me that you see if you attend something with the CIPP and the policy team. We've got Sam, she's our policy lead, and there's also Sarah Smith, who is also a policy and research officer alongside me. So you might see them in future. Now, before we fully dive in, just to sort of give you a little bit of an insight, other things that the CIPP does. So we want to make sure that payroll is at the centre of everything. And that's why we've got all these different offerings. So the policy team is part of membership. We are a membership benefit, although you're lucky enough to get me here today if you are not a member. We also offer training, consultancy, qualifications. So when you get the slides at the end, you'll get a PDF. These will all be links. You'll be able to click through to those if you want to know more. Let's have a look at what we're going to run through today. So we're going to have a look at income tax, national insurance, statutory payments and deduction, the new neonatal care leave and pay, national minimum wage and national living wage rates, a little bit of a touch on pension benefits, and then a little bit of a look into the future of what's next. I can see everyone saying good morning now. Hello, everybody. So let's dive straight into the first bit, and it's a very easy thing to cover, the tax thresholds for 25-26. The personal allowance is still frozen and the tax bandings and percentages are still all frozen for England and Wales. That means the standard tax code next year is still going to be 1257L, as we've known it for some time. And the Welsh rates are going to remain at parity with England. Now, this is something that I did speculate last year, that Wales would take advantage of their devolved status and change those tax rates. There was some rumours that that was going to be on the cards. However, that hasn't come to fruition for the 25-26 tax year. That doesn't mean it won't happen in future, but for the time being, they are staying at parity with the rest of the UK or England, which brings us on to Scotland, where we do have some changes. So we've got changes to essentially the basic and intermediate bands. So the banding where the starter rate ends is changing, the basic rate start and end, and then the start of that intermediate rate. Those rates are remaining the same, but those bandings are changing. It's definitely something to be aware of if you are processing anyone who lives in Scotland, is on one of those Scottish tax codes with the S. Moving on to some income tax allowances. That personal allowance income limit still staying at £100,000. Married couples allowance and the blind person's allowance are being uprated, and that was uprated by the September CPI figure, which I believe was 1.7%. Not 100% sure on that, but those are being uprated. So if you still do have people on married couples allowance, very unlikely, but you may do. Make sure that you're uprating those minimum and maximum allowances, and as well as the blind person's allowance. But the dividend allowance on there, which is now down to £500, but not necessarily something you need to be acutely aware of for processing payroll. Now, the big one, national insurance. This has obviously been in the news quite a bit because there are some large changes to national insurance. First thing to highlight on here is just a slight uprating of that lower earnings limit, going up to £125 per week from 123, I believe. So very small change there. The big change we need to talk about is that change to the secondary threshold. So it's coming down from £9,100 per year to £5,000 per year. Now, I don't need to tell you that for a lot of businesses, this is huge. Someone who was already over that £9,100 allowance, this annual threshold change means an extra £615 per employee that you would need to pay in employers' national insurance. That's before we go on to the rates change for everything above that. This is going to particularly hit some businesses like retail and hospitality that employ a lot of low-paid workers, where potentially you may have workers working part-time that are now going to be brought into paying national insurance contributions from on the employer's side, where previously they were not. This is going to be something that we encourage you to have a look at your forecasting if you haven't done already, because I'm sure a lot of businesses have already done this, to work out what that actual impact means for you. Luckily, on the payroll processing side, it is just a threshold change, which does mean that it is a very little process change for you, but as a business, it is a large thing to factor in and to consider. Now we look at the rates, and I have certainly been guilty of this. We've been focused so much on that huge threshold change that you can almost forget that we have had a rate change as well. So we are going up from 13.8 to 15% on that employer's national insurance rates. So we do need to make sure that we're changing that in our software and make sure we're applying that correctly. This also means that extra 1.2 percentage points on everything above that £9,100 threshold, as it is this year, is also going to have a huge factor on those costs. So do be aware of that. Said, make sure that you are doing some reporting and thinking about what those costs are going to be next year if you haven't already. Just to continue that here, we've also got here the rates for free ports and investment zones. Not a huge deal if you don't operate within a free ports or investment zones. Just a quick point on these, that the RTI reporting is changing. You will be required from April to provide a postcode for employees who are on one of these national insurance codes, essentially to prove that you have done the checks with regards to the more than 60% working time within those free port zones. Sticking with national insurance slightly, there is a little bit of a saving grace for smaller businesses, in that the employment allowance is being increased to £10,500 from £5,000. This is intended to try and help those smaller businesses offset these additional costs of the increased NI bills that they are going to be facing. On top of that increase to the employment allowance, that £100,000 NI threshold that you had to comply with for eligibility is also being removed. This means that it is going to be open to way more employers than it was before. So pretty much every company can claim it. However, you do need to be very sure that you are not part of a connected company. Now, HMRC has some guidance on gov.uk to work out whether you are part of a connected company. So if you are a subsidiary, or you have subsidiaries, or you have sort of sister companies, linked companies with maybe common directors, you need to have a look and make sure that you are not considered a linked company. If so, only one of those companies is allowed to claim the allowance. So definitely something to make sure that you are doing compliantly and you're not falling foul to that and claiming something that you're not entitled to. Little hints and tips though with the employment allowance, something that was recently brought to my attention is you claim this via the EPS, obviously, so you claim that. You do not have to claim it at the start of the year. So you can claim this at any point during the tax year. So if you, for example, have peaks and troughs with your sort of income and you want to try and mitigate against some of those troughs, you can claim this at a later point in the year. So that is definitely something to be aware of. One extra quick point before I leave. If you now know that you were eligible for the employment allowance, if this has kind of sparked something for you to think, oh, actually, should we have been claiming the employment allowance? You can backdate this for up to 4 years, I believe, if you were eligible during those years. So if you now believe that you were eligible and you were never claiming it, and this has kind of just brought it to your attention, then do check with HMRC whether you can backdate those claims. You know, if you've got 4 years of £5,000 that you can offset against your national insurance bill, that's going to be £20,000, which for a small business is not an insignificant amount. So do check whether you can go and claim that retrospectively. So moving on to some statutory payments. So here is the table for statutory sick pay. And these are the daily rates that are paid based on how many qualifying days during the week. So for example, a standard worker working 5 days a week, you have 5 qualifying days a week. If you're paying 3 days in that week, you would look down and across, and that's £71.25. Now, this table is provided by HMRC. You don't need to worry about those unrounded daily rates. That's for in the background of the payroll software. So if you're a Sintra user, that's for Sintra to worry about, not you. But this is definitely a useful table for just quickly identifying how much you should be paying and making sure that you are processing correctly. Quick note on SSP while we're talking about SSP. We have seen some confusion in the market around the proposed SSP reforms. To make it absolutely clear, the SSP reforms that have been proposed by the government form part of the Employment Rights Bill. This is still currently going through the normal parliamentary passage. It's just gone through the committee stage, and I believe it's now at report stage. This does mean that things can be chopped and changed, and the House of Lords will get its opportunity to change things and propose amendments. So those SSP reforms are not going to be coming in April 2025. So for now, statutory sick pay continues as normal. Other statutory payments, these have been uprated as well. So you can see we're now on £187.18, except of course where you would pay that 90% of the average weekly earnings. These are going to apply from Sunday, 6th of April. So the statutory payments apply on a Sunday to Saturday weekly basis. Luckily, the Sunday is the 6th this year. Now, let's move on to the statutory neonatal care pay and leave. So we just saw it there. It was on that last table. Now, this is a new parental leave entitlement. It is very different to the way in which we have processed statutory parental leave in all of the situations so far. So it is complicated. We are still awaiting the guidance at the moment. So please do wait for that. This is all going to be as we understand it right now. I'm going to try and talk through this as clearly as possible. But like I said, please do understand it is fairly complicated and a little bit different. If we've got time at the end, I do have a few examples we can run through. So if you would feel that would be helpful, please do throw that in the chat or make sure we kind of try and leave some time for those at the end. But just to try and go over the key details, so this is an addition to other leave and pay entitlements. This does not supersede or overwrite any other leave entitlements such as adoption, bereavement, paternity, definitely not maternity. But this is an addition, so this is on top of those other entitlements. It's to be taken in week increments, must be full weeks up to a maximum of 12 weeks, and it is applied where a child enters neonatal care within 28 days of birth and completes a stay of at least 7 days. So this 7 days is very important. We'll come on to it, but it's because it's accrued in retrospect, not known about in advance. This is where the complications come and where it differs so much to previous parental leaves that we already have. Another thing that might help contextualize this as we go through this is that the entitlement is attached to a parent who qualifies because of a child's neonatal stay. The entitlement isn't attached to the child. Might sound a bit strange, but it might make more sense as we run through. It's available to each parent, so it's not a shared 12 weeks. So each parent will be entitled to the statutory neonatal care leave and pay if they qualify. It is a day one right, so this will apply from the first day of employment, but the pay will require continuity of service and earnings tests, similar to what we see with other parental leave rights. Now, where it differs is there are 2 tiers of leave. So we'll go into tier 1 first. And as I go through this, some of you are going to be thinking, how does this work with maternity? I really want you to sort of put that at the back of your mind for now. We will come on to that, but I know it's going to be a question that sparks into your head. See a question, do you need any sort of evidence for neonatal leave? The evidence for the leave is going to be very minimal. Evidence for the pay may require more evidence, but we'll sort of come on to that, and that will be within the guidance. We're not exactly sure what that evidence is right now. So tier 1, as I said before, the entitlement is gained in arrears. This is where it differs from other parental leaves in that you don't know how long this is going to be at the start of the leave. So we gain it in arrears. The leave is available to take while the child is receiving neonatal care and the week following discharge. So with tier 1, this is to be used as the child is in neonatal care. The week following discharge is to allow you to use the leave that was accrued in week 1 at the end, because during week 1, the entitlement was not built up yet. Now, this does introduce a complication in that you do need to consider as a business what you do in that first week, because under the strict definition of the rules, that should not be neonatal care leave and pay, but we will come on to that. It can be taken in a limited number of blocks, but each block must be a continuous week. However, as we stated earlier, to be eligible for neonatal care leave and pay, the care needs to start within 28 days after the birth. And if this leave would overlap with a pre-booked leave, such as shared parental or paternity, the neonatal care leave can be paused, and then the rest of the leave can be taken at the end, provided that the interrupting leave finishes within tier 1. If it finishes within tier 2, which we'll come on to, then that remaining leave must be booked as tier 2, which has slightly more strict notice periods. But the notice period for tier 1, which we'll go through now, the employee must give the employer notice of leave before they are due to start work or on the first day of absence from work in that week. So quite loose in that essentially, once you've built up that 7 days, you've accrued 7 days of neonatal care leave and pay, You just need to let the employer know before the start of work. Quite loose, designed to be not onerous on the individual. Obviously, they're going through quite a stressful time, I imagine. So you would allow them to have that leave. Or the other side of this, as soon as reasonably practicable, following the child's admission, to signify their intention to statutory neonatal leave after the child has been in neonatal care for 7 continuous days. So again, trying to be very flexible here. The pay, however, notice must be given within 28 days following the start of the leave. So essentially, we'll backdate that if needed, but the notice, again, quite loose on that. Now, let's go on to tier 2. And essentially, this is any situation outside of that tier 1 leave. Now, here's here, such as when already on maternity. So, in a maternity situation, we obviously know that maternity leave starts the day after the child is born, at the latest. So once the child is born, the maternity leave must start the following day. Well, if the child is born and immediately goes into neonatal care, at that point, we haven't built up that 7-day entitlement. So no entitlement has accrued yet. So you would start your maternity leave, and then you wouldn't be able to take the neonatal care leave until after the maternity leave. And that is why tier 2 leave is available from the 2nd week following release, so after that tier 1 period, all the way up to 68 weeks following the child's birth. Now, the 68 weeks has essentially been calculated to be the full entitlement to maternity. In an unfortunate situation, also bereavement leave, and then potentially a full 12 weeks of neonatal care leave. So that's why 68 weeks. If in the very unlikely situation you wouldn't be able to use all the entitlement within that period, essentially we've been told to process the maximum amount of leave entitlement possible. Now, once you're in tier 2 leave, it must be taken in one continuous block. So it can't be split up. It's kind of just taken. At this point, you know, because we're outside of the neonatal care being administered, we know that the length of time that is required, so it just must be taken in one block. Now, for notice here, the employee must give the employer notice of leave for 1 week of leave, 2 weeks and 1 day. For 2 weeks of leave or more, it's capped at 4 weeks notice. So essentially it's either 2 weeks and 1 day or 4 weeks notice, depending on whether it's 1 week or 2 or more. And again, notice of pay must be given within 28 days following the start of leave, exactly the same as tier 1. So will you pay out maternity and neonatal leave at the same time once it's claimed, or the person qualifies? No. So the leave and pay happen at the same time. So if someone qualifies for neonatal care leave and pay while on maternity, you're not going to pay them at that point in time. You are going to process the maternity as normal. Don't interrupt maternity, because if you interrupt maternity, there's all sorts of trouble you can get yourself into there. So don't interrupt the maternity. The neonatal care leave and pay will be appended onto the end of the maternity. So essentially, practically, for how you process this with payroll, you would be looking at that as the same as you would process or factor in accrued holiday. You'd be trying to work out, we need to process the neonatal, any accrued holiday that they want to take at the end of the maternity, and then figure out a back to work. So yeah, someone's asking the same question again, so hopefully that covers that. Now, there is a big question mark over what to do of those first 7 days. And this is something that we'd flagged to government when we've discussed this with them. Because neonatal care leave is earned in arrears, the first 7 days that a child is in care cannot be classed as neonatal care leave. But we understand that employers will want to do the right thing and allow employees that time off. What we don't suggest is to do any sort of creative accounting where you would allow them to take the neonatal care leave from day one, because technically they don't have that right. So what do you do? So you've got options. You've got emergency family leave, where the employer has choice over what you want to pay for that. But what that does do is it still gives certain employment protections. You've got other statutory leave, so such as paternity. If someone wants to take their paternity leave straight away to cover that first week, that would be fine. However, we do state that it has to be a mutual choice, because you would essentially be working around the normal notice periods if you were just taking that straight away. Or annual leave entitlement. Again, the employer can't force this. It's going to have to be a mutual decision, because you can't force the employee to use the holiday, because again, you would not be complying with the notice requirements. Just to clarify, what I mean by neonatal leave is earned in arrears. So a child goes into neonatal care. You don't know at that point how long they're going to be in care. So we must wait a week until they've built a week of entitlement, because we can only process statutory parental leave in weeks. And yes, maternity leave does have to start at the day after the baby is born, so the neonatal will be appended onto the end. I'll go through some of those examples at the end, but we'll quickly go through the rest of this now, and then we'll go look at the examples at the end, because I think they will be helpful. While we are on statutory payments, the 2025-26 small employers relief is being increased. So the small employers relief is a compensation rate basically paid to small employers when they process statutory parental leave payments. And in the 25-26 tax year, this is being increased from 3% to 8.5%. So employers can reclaim 108.5% of their entitlements through the EPS. The threshold will remain that £45,000 of Class 1 NICs in the previous complete tax year, but just make sure that you are applying that from April. I can see some questions still coming in. I'll clock those, and we'll try and have a look at those when we come to the examples. Like I said, still awaiting the guidance. There are some sort of edge cases we're still waiting to clear up. Student loans, quickly, we've got Plan 1, Plan 2 and Plan 4 being uprated. All the rates are remaining the same, but just make sure you're applying those correct percentages. We've highlighted here Plan 5. We're still not expecting Plan 5 to be processed until April 2026, but definitely something to keep on your radar. National minimum wage rates. So again, a huge thing for some employers. These national living wage and national minimum wage rates are increasing by quite a substantial percentage for some of them. Again, going to hit those businesses such as retail and hospitality that quite typically pay close to these rates. So again, look at your forecasting and have a think about how this is going to impact you. Do quickly want to highlight here that the CIPP fed into a low pay commission report, which has recently been published. So do go have a look at that. There were some comments from CIPP and CIPP members in there. So thank you if there's anyone on the call who fed into that. But one of the things that we highlighted, and we have highlighted for the past couple of years, but very important for you to think about, is the interaction between national minimum wage rates and salary sacrifice. As these rates increase by quite substantial percentages, a lot of employers are saying their pay differentials are being squeezed. So for example, if you have a difference between an administrator and a team leader, as the minimum wage rates increase, the administrator might need to be bumped up quite a bit, and you're not necessarily bumping up the team leader by the same amount. So pay differentials are being squeezed. What this means, though, for salary sacrifice is that people who were previously okay to be on a salary sacrifice scheme potentially might not be anymore, because you have to look at the post-sacrifice amount when calculating if they're compliant for national minimum wage purposes. So really are encouraging you, if you do have people on salary sacrifice schemes, make sure you're doing your checks, make sure you're having a look and seeing whether they are still compliant and will still be compliant once these national minimum wage rates increase. Very important. Don't want any of you on a naming and shaming list. That can be quite bad for your company's reputation, and fairly easily avoided if you just do those right calculations. Quick pensions update. There isn't really too much changing in the pensions landscape at the moment. Just to highlight that the government now has no plans to explore that lifetime provider model, which was brought up by the previous Conservative government, which would see a person's pension pot move with them over their career rather than building up small pots. But they are still carrying on with plans for the small pots consolidation. So where someone has a small inactive pot of less than £1,000 for more than 12 months, there will be a process to consolidate those pots into larger schemes so that workers don't have lost pots, something that's also going to be helped with the pensions dashboard you may have heard of, but also so that those pots can be used more efficiently in the UK investment space. That's part of the government's intention with that, and also not be eroded by fees for the individual saver. The triple lock has also been guaranteed from the autumn budget. However, there is starting to be some rumblings from different political entities about wanting to scrap the triple lock. Only time will tell, but it doesn't seem like it'll be a particularly popular idea. I'm not going to go through all this information. It's going to be there on your slides though, and you can have a look back through the recording if you wish. But just to highlight that we do have those 28.29 and 29.30 company car rates. Now, some of them are going to be going up quite significantly. However, we do think it is a good thing that the government is releasing these rates up to around about 5 years ahead of time. I really think 5 years is the minimum we should be expecting these company car rates to be published. Businesses want to plan their fleets quite far in advance. You may have contracts running up to 5 years. So we really are encouraging them to continue with this trend of releasing that up to 5 years in advance. Payrolling reminder. So just to quickly brief everyone, mandating of payrolling is coming in 2026. If you want to voluntarily payroll for 25-26, you do need to register by the 5th of April. This will be the last time you will need to voluntarily register to payroll most benefits ahead of 2026, where payrolling benefits will be the only way to process them, apart from for loans and accommodation. From April 2026, those two benefits will become voluntary, and you must register for those, but everything else will just be automatically assumed to be payrolled. You then won't need to produce a P11DB for those payrolled benefits. It should all be processed in real time. As of right now, we are still waiting for more information on how things need to be processed and potential RTI changes. So I'm sure Sintra is getting very twitchy right about now, waiting for that information, as are we. Justina, no, you should not need to register for 2026. Once it becomes mandatory, there's no need to register because it will be automatically assumed you will be doing it, and the data you need to provide should be factored into RTI, but that is definitely what's being discussed by government at the moment, and hopefully we should get some more information soon. As soon as we have the information, we'll put it on our website, so keep tuned for that. A couple of questions coming in. So for payrolling benefits, if you open a new company currently with voluntary, you wouldn't be able to register I don't know whether there's any sort of special circumstances where HMRC can allow you to do that. I would suggest speaking to the employer helpline. Once it becomes mandatory, it will just be processed as is. The benefit's not known until the tax year is over. Again, there are things being put in place in order to be able to rectify things at year end. In terms of if you have an estimate or a guess partway through the year, I would imagine you would be wanting to provide those estimates throughout the year. Is the HMRC approved mileage rates for cars and vans set at 45p when driven under 10,000 miles still not taxable? See, that's the approved mileage rate. So that is the rate that you're allowed to pay without reporting. So yes, you can continue doing that. If you already pay on some benefits, do you have to register again for the next tax year? No, I don't believe so. I think that carries over. I'm fairly sure that carries over, but I would just I double check that. But if you've already registered, that's fine. You only need to register for new benefits. So currently as well, when you register for payroll and benefits, it will give you a list of different benefits and you need to select them. You need to select which benefits you will be payrolling. If you want to payroll additional benefits outside of what you've already told them, you will need to register for those additional benefits. Thanks, Debbie. So yeah, Debbie's backing me up on that one. Yes, they do carry over unless you have another new benefit that you haven't previously registered for. Excellent. So quickly, what's next? So recently we've had additional hours worked data reporting not going ahead. So this is HMRC wanted to improve the data that they collected and wanted to change from a hours banding to an actual hours. They've now decided, based on feedback, so very well done if you fed back that you didn't like it, that this isn't going ahead. It's going to put too much of an admin burden on businesses and it's not proportionate to what they want to do, which is exactly what we kind of fed back to them. So thank you. Bear with me. Okay, managed to mute myself just in time. As we've just explored, the payrolling of benefits becomes mandatory in 2026. It's not necessarily something for right now, but thinking into the future. Just off the back of that, 2026 is shaping up to be a year of big change. You know, I briefly mentioned earlier, we've got the employment rights bill still going through Parliament. I'd expect over the next year, once that reaches royal assent, that doesn't mean that everything within there becomes law. What it means is that the government has the power to enact these things when they want to. So what we would expect is a lot of consultations on all the different measures. So there's a lot of employment rights stuff, obviously, but a lot of sort of payroll HR stuff that you will need to consider and potentially change your processes for. So definitely keep an eye out for updates on that. And then we've also got the spring forecast in March. Now, just to temper expectations, this is not a budget. It is a spring forecast. So I don't expect there to be a huge amount of change brought forward in this. Obviously, the 26th of March is probably a little bit too late to change things for the new tax year, but with government, you never know. But it should just be a bit of an economic forecast and a look at the economics of the country, rather than any sort of changes to laws or the way that tax is processed. So not expecting any change, but I'm not prepared to put money on that. So got time for some questions. So if you have any other questions, please do throw them in the chat. Now, before I sort of go, I'm going to jump into some of the examples for the neonatal care leave and pay, because I do think that would be beneficial. But I do just want to quickly raise, Sintra have asked me to mention that they are running another webinar this week, how to manage rising wage costs in 2025. It's obviously something that we've talked about quite a bit today with the national minimum wage and the national insurance contributions. So there's a little pop-up that should be in the corner for you now. So if you do want to register for that, yeah, you can do so now. So Vicky says, HMRC stated that employers have to write to their employees to let them know what benefits have been payrolled and the cost of these at the end of each year. Can the accumulated figure be put on pay slips or a report provided by the payroll provider? I'm not sure if there's any sort of particular template for this, just that you've sort of adequately explained the payroll benefits. You should be able to pull a report from payroll software if you are payrolling. So I would explore that with your sort of software provider to see if that's something that they can help with. Will it be a dedicated payroll, a dedicated webinar? I'll ask Centra about that, but certainly from the CIPP, we'll be putting some effort into explaining the mandatory P11, the mandatory payrolling requirements. We are yet to receive more information, so so do keep an eye out for that when we get more information. And right, let's have a quick look at some neonatal examples, because I do think this will be beneficial. So I can see some more questions coming through. Keep putting them in there. I'm going to go through these examples and then see if I can come back to them. If not, we'll pull the questions at the end, and then I'll work with Sintra to get some answers to those questions for you. But let's have a look. So we said earned in arrears. So we do have the situation where someone is in neonatal care, or the child is in neonatal care for 6 days. In this instance, no entitlement is accrued, as you can see here, week 1. So there's no planned leave. The baby's born early and admitted into neonatal care, stays for 6 calendar days. There's no entitlement. So you as an employer need to decide what you're doing with this time. Because if you allow the employee to be off from day 1, we now have a situation where no entitlement has been accrued. So you can't give them neonatal care leave or pay. What have you done with that time? So it needs to come from somewhere else. Otherwise, it would potentially be unpaid. So you need to kind of think about what you want to do in these situations. In a fairly clean standard example, here we've got someone whose child is admitted into neonatal care leave, neonatal care for 5 weeks. There's no interrupting leave, so they can exercise their right to neonatal care leave and pay if they qualify from week 2 all the way up until week 6. So that's where that week following discharge comes in. And this is a fairly nice, clean example. Where we've got interrupting leave, we do not move that interrupting leave. That interrupting leave stays as it is, and then you append any remaining neonatal care leave and pay onto the end, provided that that interrupting leave finished within that tier 1 period. So you can see here it finished week 4, week 5, and the neonatal care leave continued until the end of week 5. So we can just append that onto the end. A tier 2 example. So we had some questions around maternity leave. So here, if a child goes into neonatal care from week 1, maternity will automatically start. So I can see someone said, if the baby's born early, did they not automatically start maternity leave? Just to sort of go back here, we're assuming here that this is not a maternity leave situation. This could be the other parent. So here, where we're talking about the birth mother in this instance, they would automatically go on to leave. So here they've gone on to 52 weeks of maternity leave. So that's 4 weeks that they're entitled to. So we've got this 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks of neonatal care received. That then needs to be appended onto the end of maternity. And you've got up to that 68 weeks to use that. Where it's a little bit more complicated, so let's just say a child is in neonatal care for 2 weeks here. So week 1, week 2, we start the neonatal care leave week 2, and then they come out of neonatal care as we're going into a pre-planned leave. Well, because this pre-planned leave now ends outside of that tier 1 period, the remaining leave must be booked as tier 2. So it needs to then comply with those notice periods required to book that. So it will be booked for a later date. That's the end of the examples, but I hope that cleared up some. I can see lots of questions coming in. Natal care including any Alabaster calculations. Alabaster specifically applies to maternity. And in terms of providing evidence, we don't have that full information yet. So once we do know that, we will let people know. Few other things to note about neonatal care is that there are going to be guidance on specific other cases around adoption, multiple births. So where someone has twins, for example, they still only get the 12 weeks. They don't get 2 lots of 12 weeks based off the 2 children. And this is why I said it applies to the parent, not the child. So it's the parent's eligibility, regardless of how many children are in that birth, basically. Let me just have a quick scan through the questions, make sure I've covered everything off. National minimum wage for sacrifice met before deducting the sacrifice or before. So you need to take the sacrifice amount off because it's a contractual change to pay. Then you calculate whether you're compliant for national minimum wage purposes. Yes, slides are going to be sent. And yes, Paul, we don't know what forms are going to be required. It's just going to, it's likely to be that in the first instance there's going to be sort of very little evidence requirements. The pay may require further evidence requirements. The idea is that leave needs to be taken quite flexibly as they want to take it, but then afterwards, once it gets to pay, you're probably required to provide a little bit more evidence. Sorry, mouse stopped working there. Yeah, so I think I've covered off most of the questions. I can see chat's ticking up now, so I'll get Sintra to pull the rest of the questions, and if there's anything we haven't covered, we'll come back to you, but I'm fairly sure we covered most things there. So thank you very much for joining us today. I hope you have a fantastic rest of the day, and I will see you soon if you attend Sintra's user conference. I believe I'm going to be there again this year, so have a good day, and I will speak to you soon.